Welcome to Nero's Secrets. I'm your host, Jimmy. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more mystery stories. Chapter 1. The Music That Died at Dusk. The train wound its way through the Sussex countryside, cutting through hills softened by the haze of late autumn. The windows of the first-class carriage reflected streaks of dying sunlight, giving the compartment a golden glow. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a dove-grey suit with a matching waistcoat and his patent leather shoes shining like polished glass, sat bolt upright as ever, reading Le Soir with a fastidious crease held in the centre. Across from him I sat, Captain Arthur Hastings, half lost in a dose, until the newspaper snapped closed with Poirot's customary precision. "Friend," he said with that familiar glint in his eye, "do you believe in genius?" "Genius?" I repeated, blinking. "Certainly. I served under a few brilliant men in the war. One chap, Colonel Wexford, could size up a map like it was a nursery puzzle." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah non, non, mon ami. Military genius is admirable, but I speak of artistic genius, of beauty that makes the soul ache. I say, you're being a bit poetic, aren't you?" "It is the effect of the violin," he said gravely, tapping the envelope tucked in his breast pocket. "Or rather, the absence of it." He withdrew the letter and handed it to me. It was written on thick cream paper, with an elegant crest embossed at the top. The address read, "The Aubrey Estate, Chidlingfold, Sussex. Dear Monsieur Poirot, I write to you not with accusations nor dramatic declarations, but with a quiet, gnawing unease. My brother, the violinist Edric Aubrey, vanished from our family estate 10 nights ago after a private recital. The police believe he has left of his own will, perhaps eloped, perhaps fled debts or scandal. But I assure you, it is not so simple. Something is wrong. I feel it. Our household is not what it was. Our father, the conductor Edmund Aubrey, insists upon secrecy. But I cannot sit in silence. Please come. I shall make sure you are received without alarm. Yours sincerely, Clarissa Aubrey." I looked up. "Vanished, you say? Couldn't he have simply, what's the word, wandered off for a break? Artistic types are always moody." Poirot's moustache twitched with disapproval. "Artists are human beings, Hastings, and human beings, no matter how moody, do not disappear into the fog without leaving, behind clues, psychological or otherwise. If a man of genius plays a sonata at dusk and is never heard from again, something sinister is at play." I shrugged. "Seems like the local constabulary disagrees." Poirot gave a slight nod. "Oui. And they may continue to chase shadows while I look at the light." The train pulled into the quiet station at Chidlingfold. A uniformed chauffeur holding a sign marked Monsieur Poirot stood waiting on the platform. Within minutes, we were seated inside a black Daimler, the countryside unfolding around us in browns and greys. Clarissa Aubrey met us at the front steps of the estate. A grand but weathered mansion with ivy clinging to its stones and a sense of faded grandeur. She was a tall woman in her early 30s, with auburn hair tucked under a cloche hat, her features composed but weary. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with quiet urgency, shaking his hand. I can't tell you what a relief it is to see you." "And this is my friend, Captain Hastings." She nodded politely, then turned toward the house. "We must speak in the music room. My father is not to know. He is volatile. As we entered, the scent of old wood and resin greeted us. The music room was lined with instruments, all neatly arranged. Cellos, violas, flutes. But the violin case at the centre of the room sat open and empty. My brother played here the night. He vanished, she said, her voice tight. He had just finished The Swan. It was his favourite piece. He stood, smiled at me, said he needed air, and walked into the hallway. That was 10 nights ago. He never returned. Poirot walked to the violin case and examined it closely. His fingers hovered just above the velvet lining, but did not touch. No signs of struggle, no notes, letters. Nothing. He left his coat, his scarf, everything. Did he have enemies? Her hesitation was brief, but present. No one obvious. My father, perhaps. Their relationship was difficult. And who was present that evening? She hesitated again. My father, myself, my cousin Lionel, our housekeeper Mrs. Thorne, and Edric's former pupil, Miss Vera Carlyle. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Former pupil? They were very close once. She now gives lessons in the village. But she was here that night, at my brother's invitation. Poirot nodded slowly. And the police? They think he's eloped, or cracked under pressure. My father paid them to keep things discreet. Poirot turned toward the window, watching the last orange light fade beyond the garden hedges. Miss Aubrey, he said softly, I will help you, but you must understand, I do not chase after men who vanish. I pursue the truth. Sometimes that truth is tragic. She met his gaze squarely. I only want to know what happened, even if the truth is bitter. He gave a courtly bow. Then, let us begin. He turned to me. Hastings, we shall require a list of those present on that fateful evening, their full names, occupations, and relationships, and I must speak with each of them, quietly. I raised an eyebrow. You think one of them knows more than they're saying? Poirot's eyes glinted. May we? In every mystery, someone always knows more than they admit. It is simply a question of finding which silence is loudest. Chapter 2. The Faces Behind the Music. The drawing-room into which we were shown was as sombre as it was refined. Tall windows partly veiled by sheer drapes, heavy furniture polished to a brooding sheen, and portraits of long-gone Aubreys watching, from the walls as though guarding secrets of generations past. Clarissa offered tea, which Poirot politely declined with a gesture of his gloved hand. His attention was focused entirely on the piano bench beneath one of the tall arched windows. The recital, he said softly. It was held here. Clarissa nodded. Yes, my brother preferred the acoustics in this room. He played often for the family. Poirot looked around slowly. And you say it was a private affair. Let us list, if you please, those in attendance that evening. Each person who heard Edric play his final piece. Clarissa clasped her hands, folding them neatly in her lap, as though bracing herself. There were 6 of us. Myself, my father, Edmund Aubrey. He is 71, and still conducts twice a year in London, though his health has declined. Lionel, our cousin. He's, how do I say this, awkward. He's lived here since childhood, after his parents died. Poirot tilted his head. And he and your brother? Never close. Lionel is a dabbler. Paints, writes odd verse. He always envied Edric's talent. Continue, mademoiselle. She inhaled. Vera Carlyle, Edric's former pupil. She's very gifted, if a touch melodramatic. She and Edric were once thought to be engaged, but the arrangement ended quietly. Poirot made a note on a small card from his pocketbook. Interesting. Then there's Mrs. Thorne, our housekeeper. She's been with us 30 years, practically a fixture of the household. Devout, formal, a bit superstitious. And the sixth. Clarissa hesitated. The butler, Joseph Kettering. He served drinks, then excused himself after the first sonata. Poirot tapped his fingers gently together. No guests outside the family? No members of the musical society or visiting friends? None. It was a closed affair. My father insisted. Poirot rose and paced toward the window, gazing into the grounds. Beyond the fog-dusted lawn, a small marble statue of Apollo loomed from the shadows of an overgrown hedge maze. The violin case still sat open on the piano's lid, its absence as loud as the silence Edric had left behind. "Tell me," Poirot said over his shoulder, "what was the atmosphere that evening? Tense, joyous?" Clarissa's brows furrowed. "Odd. That's the only word I can find. Edric was subdued but polite. Father seemed agitated. He was whispering with Lionel beforehand. Vera kept watching, Edric too intently, as if trying to read his thoughts. Poirot turned back. And afterward? After the final piece, there was polite applause. Edric bowed, thanked us, and said he would walk outside to clear his mind. He had that habit, taking in air after playing. He left through the rear corridor. I never saw him again. Poirot said nothing for a long moment. Then he moved toward the hallway, brushing his fingers along the banister. "May I see the corridor through which he vanished?" "Of course. This way." She led us down a narrower passage branching from the drawing-room. It was a stretch of dim hallway with dark panelling and faded carpet, leading to a small wooden door that opened into the gardens. Poirot studied the floor, noting a hairline crack in one of the tiles and a scuff mark by the edge. He did not take his coat, no, or his gloves, nor his scarf. Did anyone see him leave? Clarissa shook her head. Only Joseph, perhaps, if he was nearby. But he denies it. Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, note this. A man accustomed to the cold, who dresses, precisely, walks into a chilly garden in November without outerwear. Either he expected to return quickly, or he never intended to return at all." We returned inside, and Clarissa led us toward the guest chambers where we would be staying. The house, once musical and full of life, now seemed smothered in silence. From somewhere upstairs, a clock chimed 4. "Tell me," Poirot asked as we ascended the staircase, "what sort of man was your brother? Truly?" Clarissa stopped, one hand on the carved banister. "Brilliant, mercurial, lonely. He poured his soul into his music because he never trusted anyone with his heart. I don't think even I fully knew him." Poirot nodded solemnly. "That is often the way with the artists, mademoiselle. They love in silence and scream through strings." At the top of the stairs, a door creaked open. A young woman in a soft blue blouse stepped out. Her gaze settled on us immediately. "Miss Vera Carlyle," Clarissa said, her voice neutral. "This is Monsieur Hercule Poirot. He's—" assisting us. Vera Carlyle's eyes met Poirot's, calm but challenging. Another inquiry. I should think there have been enough of those already. Poirot smiled gently and bowed. Mademoiselle, I never inquire. I observe. And sometimes when the truth is quiet enough, I merely listen. Her lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. Then you may find this house very noisy indeed. She turned and walked down the corridor, her steps precise, her back straight. Poirot watched her go, his gaze narrowing. She has something to say, he murmured to no one in particular. But not with her words. He glanced at me. We shall begin the interviews this evening, Hastings, but already I feel the melody of this mystery playing its first discordant notes. Chapter 3. Shadows between the notes, dinner at the Aubrey estate was a quiet, ceremonial affair. The long mahogany table stretched beneath the glow of twin chandeliers, and the silverware gleamed with obsessive polish. At the head sat Edmund Aubrey, the famed conductor, whose presence dominated the room not through volume, but through the cold silence that clung to him like a second skin. His hair, once a lion's mane of silver, had thinned but retained an aristocratic wave. His deep-set eyes flicked from one guest to the next as if conducting an invisible orchestra of tension. Poirot sat to his right, his posture immaculate, his napkin folded with origami-like precision. I was placed beside Vera Carlyle, who offered a polite nod and immediately resumed slicing her trout with a deftness that suggested distraction rather than appetite. Clarissa had introduced Poirot with vague words. A friend of the family, interested in the arts. And neither her father nor cousin had pressed for more. But it was clear the atmosphere had changed since our arrival. There was a subtle stiffness, like strings tightened just past the point of harmony. So, Edmund said suddenly, his voice cool and precise, Monsieur Poirot, is it? Are you a patron of the violin? Poirot sipped his wine before responding. Ah, mais oui. The violin is the most human of instruments, is it not? It weeps, it trembles, it sings of joy and sorrow. A man's soul lies in how he draws the bow. Philosophical, the old man replied, dabbing at his lips, though I found philosophy to be of little use in actual performance. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps, but in performance as in life, is it not true that one must understand the soul behind the sound? Vera glanced up then, her expression unreadable. Across the table, Lionel Aubrey gave a low chuckle. You'll have to forgive my uncle, Monsieur Poirot. He believes art is mathematics set to music. Emotion makes him uncomfortable. Edmund's gaze turned icy. Spare me the amateur dramatics, Lionel. Lionel smiled faintly. He was a slender man in his late 30s, with a prematurely lined face and eyes that danced with veiled sarcasm. His cravat was carelessly knotted, his wine-glass never quite full. Poirot turned his gaze to him. And you, monsieur, are a painter, I hear. I dabble, Lionel replied. Mostly landscapes no one buys, and portraits no one hangs. Yet you remain here. Oh, I do, he said with a flash of something darker. This house feeds on those who stay. Clarissa broke in gently. Lionel has a poet's temperament, Monsieur Poirot. He doesn't mean half the things he says. On the contrary, said Poirot, I believe he means precisely half. That drew a snort from Vera, who now looked faintly amused. The meal concluded with a dessert of pears in wine, though few partook. Afterward, Clarissa excused herself, and one by one the others drifted away. Lionel to the library, Edmund to his study, and Vera murmuring something about unfinished lesson notes. Only Poirot and I remained in the dining room, now quiet, but still thick with the invisible echoes of what had gone unsaid. "You noticed, Hastings," Poirot said softly, rising and straightening his cuffs, "how quickly the topic of Edric vanished from the table. I thought that was odd. Not a single mention of him, not even a toast." "Exactly. And yet it is not merely avoidance, it is orchestration." Each person spoke with care, as if playing their part from a score. We moved to the drawing-room, where Clarissa waited by the fire, her arms folded tightly across her waist. She had changed into a navy evening gown, elegant but simple, and her expression was drawn with the fatigue of someone keeping too many secrets for too long. "Did you learn anything?" she asked quietly. "Everything and nothing," Poirot replied. "May we begin our interviews, mademoiselle?" She nodded. "I've asked them to speak with you privately. Vera is in the East Salon. Shall I send her in?" "No, I will go to her," said Poirot. "It is better that I see people in their chosen environments. The truth often lingers where they feel most safe." He left, and I remained with Clarissa. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, almost absently, "It used to be a happy house, you know." "What changed?" I asked. She turned her gaze toward the unlit window. "People stopped telling the truth. Not lies necessarily, just omissions. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Doors that were closed when they shouldn't have been. One day, I realized no one trusted anyone else anymore. And in a house full of music, there was only silence." Before I could respond, Poirot returned, his face composed but thoughtful. "She is clever, that one," he murmured. "Too clever to speak plainly. And yet she made a mistake, a small one. But it is always the small ones, n'est-ce pas, that betray the largest truths. What mistake? She said Edric was always afraid of what would happen after the recital. Not during, not before, but after." Clarissa looked startled. "And that's significant." Poirot nodded. "It is a note struck slightly off-key. We must ask, what did Edric fear? And why was the recital his line in the sand?" At that moment a soft knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Thorne, the housekeeper, stood in the hall, her hands clasped before her apron. "If it's not too late, sir," she said, glancing nervously between us, "I thought you should know. I heard music last night, just before midnight, coming from the music room. But that room was locked." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Ah," he said softly, "now the house begins to speak." Chapter 4. The ghost notes at midnight. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped behind his back, as though examining a specimen beneath glass. "Madame Thorne," he said gently, "please recount everything you heard. Take your time. Begin from the moment you first noticed it." The housekeeper gave a small, stiff nod. She was a woman of late middle age, her bun tightly coiled, her manner precise, her voice with the clipped inflection of one who believed silence preferable to exaggeration. "I was in my quarters just past 11. I had gone to bed with a headache, Too much polish, perhaps, and the wind had picked up something awful outside. I remember it rattling the attic shutters." Poirot said nothing, allowing her to gather her thoughts. "It must have been close to midnight when I heard it," she continued. "A violin, faint but clear. The melody, it was soft, mournful. At first I thought it might be Miss Vera practising, but she always plays upstairs. This was coming from the drawing-room, or rather, from the music-room just behind it." M hesitated, the tips of her fingers curling slightly. "I went to look," she said, her voice quieter now, "but the door was locked, and I saw no light under the frame." The sound stopped just as I approached. When I opened the door this morning with the cleaning key, everything was as it had been since Edric disappeared. Dust on the floor, the violin case untouched. Poirot regarded her steadily. "And you told no one?" "I told Miss Clarissa just now, when she came to fetch my laundry list. But I feared perhaps it was only the wind, or my imagination. I haven't slept well since, well." Poirot gave a small nod, almost approving. "You did well to come to us. Thank you, sir," she said with a grateful dip of her head before retreating down the corridor. As her footsteps receded, Hastings cleared his throat. "You don't actually think it was Edric's ghost?" Poirot raised a brow. "Mon ami, I believe in the ghosts of conscience, of memory, of past deeds. But violins do not play themselves. Not even spectres are so obliging." Clarissa looked pale. "But the room was locked." Poirot turned to her. "And yet the music played. Either the lock is not as secure as it seems, or someone within this house knows how to open it. Someone who wished to conjure a memory in the dark." She shivered and said nothing. That evening, Poirot requested to examine Edric's personal effects. Clarissa escorted us to his bedroom, a suite tucked at the far end of the east wing. The space was sparsely decorated, its elegance marred by a certain studied sterility. A metronome sat dormant atop the piano beside a vase of long-dead white roses. The faint scent of resin and cologne lingered in the air. Poirot moved slowly, his gloved fingers ghosting over the edges of objects without ever touching them. On the writing desk were 2 letters, both unposted. One was addressed to a publishing agency in London, an inquiry about releasing a composition titled Elegy for Silence. The other was to Vera Carlyle. Its contents were brief, typed, and unsigned. "Cannot continue as we were. The music is no longer pure. What remains between us is built on something false, and I fear it will destroy us both if not ended now." Hastings whistled under his breath. "Sounds like a lover's quarrel, or something more tangled," Poirot murmured. "A man does not write such a note if all he fears is hurt feelings. This is guilt or revelation." He opened the wardrobe next, inspecting the line of suits and shoes arranged with care. But one pair of trousers was missing from the set, a dark tweed according to the visible gap in the order. Poirot said nothing, but his gaze lingered on the empty hanger a moment longer than necessary. "Curious," he said finally, "and yet not unexpected." We returned downstairs just as Lionel emerged from the library, carrying a half-filled sherry glass and a dog-eared copy of A Season in Hell. "You roam like ghosts," he said, barely glancing at us. "Careful you don't become one." Poirot studied him. You knew Edric well? Lionel gave a dry laugh. Not well. We shared a house, not a soul. Did he share with you this elegy for silence composition? That seemed to strike a nerve. Lionel paused just a little too long. No, he said flatly. I didn't know he was writing anything. Ah, but he was. And he had planned to send it for publication. Perhaps even soon. Lionel raised an eyebrow. Then he must have been more optimistic than usual. Poirot stepped forward. Tell me, Monsieur Lionel, where were you the night after the recital, when Edric disappeared? Reading, he replied without hesitation. In the library. Ask Mrs. Thorne. She brought my tea at 10 and found me still there at 1. Poirot smiled. That is helpful. I shall speak with her. And with your book, too. The pages remember what hands forget. Lionel tilted his head. Is that supposed to sound profound? Poirot simply nodded and turned away, returning to the drawing-room. There he stood by the fireplace, gaze fixed upon the grand piano. The melody haunts this house, Hastings, he murmured. A melody of guilt, deception, and unfinished endings. But it is missing a note. Just one. And how do we find it? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he watched the reflection of the room dance in the piano's lacquered surface. We listen, he said softly, to what was not played. Chapter 5. A note left unplayed. The morning brought with it a sullen sky and a crisp wind that rustled the skeletal trees flanking the Aubrey estate. A thin mist clung to the lawns, as if reluctant to lift, draping the grounds in a quiet melancholy. Poirot, already dressed and seated in the breakfast parlour, declined the eggs offered by Mrs. Thorne, and instead contented himself with a single slice of toast, untoasted, unbuttered, and precisely trimmed. I joined him, pouring myself a generous cup of coffee. "You're unusually quiet this morning," I remarked, watching him stare at a pattern on the rug as though it held secrets. Poirot did not look up. "There is something within this house, Hastings. Not a spirit, but an intention. An unfinished gesture. I am trying to hear it. You mean the music?" He shook his head slowly. "No, mon ami. I mean the silences. It is what people choose, not to say that intrigues me." Before I could press him, Clarissa entered clutching a sealed envelope. "This came by hand," she said. "No postmark. It was found tucked beneath the front door." Poirot took the envelope carefully, examining it without opening it. No handwriting, no crest. "Hastings, the envelope." I examined it. Standard cream stock, cheap, unwatermarked, nothing remarkable. Poirot nodded and broke the seal. Inside was a single slip of paper, typed like the earlier note to Vera, found out about the ledger. He said he'd expose it after the recital. That's why he's gone. Don't ask who I am. Just look for the numbers. Clarissa paled. "Ledger? What ledger?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, now we approached the heart of it." He stood swiftly. "Miss Clarissa, does your father maintain an account book? Household records?" "Yes, in the study. He keeps them under lock." "Then I must view them." She hesitated. "He won't allow it." "Then perhaps," Poirot said, brushing a speck from his sleeve, "he need not know. The study of Edmund Aubrey was as stern and ordered as the man himself. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, a roll-top desk, and thick drapes that dulled the light to a permanent twilight. Clarissa led us inside, her movements quick, furtive. "He's in the garden," she said. "He won't be back for at least an hour." Poirot wasted no time. He moved to the desk, examined the lock, then produced a thin silver tool from his pocket. In moments the drawer yielded. Inside, a thick leather-bound ledger rested beside a fountain pen and an array of perfectly sharpened pencils. He laid it flat and turned the pages with reverent precision. "Payments," he murmured. "Concert fees, travel expenses, donations. But what is this?" Near the centre of the book, a different ink appeared. The entries changed tone, now vague, oblique. A large sum marked simply as "Consultation Private." A withdrawal of 800 duels 2 days before Edric's recital, and beside that, a note, VC, 3rd instalment. Due 17 October. Poirot tapped the page. VC, Vera Carlyle, or a coincidence? I frowned. Installment of what? A loan, a payment for silence. He said nothing, but his expression was grave. Clarissa leaned in. "That date, October 17th, that's the night of the recital." Poirot turned the page. The next entry was half-written, the ink trailing off mid-word. "No longer viable. He suspects. Must end." It stopped there. He closed the book with a decisive snap. "That," he said, "was written in haste. Interrupted, perhaps, we exited the study just as the heavy front door creaked open, and Edmund Aubrey stepped inside. His coat was damp with dew, his walking stick tapping the floor in a sharp rhythm. Clarissa greeted him calmly. "You're back early." "I forgot my gloves," he said, eyeing her and Poirot suspiciously. "What were you doing in the West Wing?" "Admiring the tapestry," she replied smoothly. "It catches the morning light." He said nothing, but studied Poirot for a beat too long before climbing the stairs. The moment he vanished from view, Clarissa exhaled slowly. "We must be careful," she whispered. "He's not as fragile as he pretends." Later that afternoon, Poirot requested to see Miss Carlyle once again. This time, she received us in the music room, where the faded violin case still sat atop the piano, like a wound left unbandaged. She stood near the window, smoking a thin cigarette, one arm crossed over her waist. "I knew you'd want to speak again," she said. Poirot inclined his head. "You and Edric, your relationship ended, but not entirely, n'est-ce pas?" Her gaze did not waver. "It never really began, not the way people assumed. Edric was brilliant, passionate, but damaged. He pushed people away when they came to, close, yet he wrote to you," Poirot said, drawing the typed letter from his pocket. "A note filled with regret, or fear." She took it, scanned it, then handed it back. He was scared. Of what he'd become. Of what others might do, because he threatened to reveal something? A pause. Then, yes. Poirot stepped closer. "Did it concern your name appearing in a ledger, alongside financial entries?" For the first time, Vera's face betrayed something. Not panic, but weariness. "I borrowed money," she said, "from Edmund, for my mother's treatment. It was unofficial. Edric found out. He was furious, thought I was being used." Was it just money? Her silence was the answer. Poirot nodded. "And after the recital, did you speak with him?" Her voice was barely audible. "Only briefly. He said he was going to confront his father. Then he left. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And you did not follow? She met his gaze. No. I stayed here, I cried, not because he was leaving, but because I knew something would happen. And I didn't stop it. He stepped back, nodded slowly, and turned to me. Hastings, note this well. The ledger, the payments, the broken engagement, they are all threads in the same tapestry, but the pattern is still incomplete. Then what now? I asked. Poirot looked toward the far corner of the room, where a music stand still held the sheet from Edric's final recital, The Swan. We must speak to the one person who has not yet played their part, he said, the conductor himself. And with that, Poirot straightened his cuffs, his gaze cool and unreadable. It is time, I think, that Monsieur Edmund Aubrey faces the music. Chapter 6. A Father. Out of Tune. The library smelled faintly of leather and pipe smoke, with shafts of afternoon light filtering through the tall windows. Edmund Aubrey stood beside the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, the other holding a brandy glass that he did not sip from. Poirot approached him slowly, like a maestro approaching a fellow conductor who had forgotten the rhythm of his own orchestra. Mr. Aubrey, Poirot began gently, forgive the interruption. Might we speak a moment? Edmund didn't turn. You're not merely a friend of the family, are you, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot gave a small bow. Non, I am a seeker of truth, which I believe you once valued more than reputation. There was a pause. Then Edmund turned, the brandy untouched, his gaze steady and hard. I know why you're here, he said. You think someone in this house caused Edric's disappearance. Perhaps even I. Poirot met his gaze without flinching. I think your son was troubled, and I think you know more than you've admitted. Edmund gave a bitter smile. Troubled? He was obsessed, reckless. His music consumed him. He resented everyone, me, the family Vera, for not bending to his will. But did he resent you enough to accuse you? Edmund's eyes narrowed. He threatened to shame the family over something he didn't understand. Poirot waited. Edmund moved to the desk and placed the brandy down with precision. Years ago, I loaned Vera money. Quietly. It was never romantic. Her mother was dying. She had no one else. I didn't want it to become scandalous, so I arranged it discreetly. But you didn't stop, Poirot said quietly. The ledger shows multiple installments. She repaid every penny. His voice was sharp now. I helped a young woman in need. Edric, in his jealousy, twisted that into something sordid. Poirot took a slow step forward. And on the night of the recital, he said he'd tell the papers, reveal some invented affair, ruin us all. I told him if he did, he'd be disowned. Poirot's voice dropped to a murmur. What did he say to that? Edmund's jaw tightened. He laughed. He said he didn't need my name anymore. He had his music. There was a long silence between them. I did not harm him, Edmund said finally quietly. I may be many things, Monsieur Poirot, but I am not a murderer. Poirot studied him. I believe you. But you have protected someone, perhaps unintentionally. Someone in this house knows more. And I believe Edric knew it too. Edmund turned away. If so, he took it to the grave. Poirot's brow lifted slightly. You think he's dead, then? A long silence. Yes, Poirot did not press further. Thank you for your honesty. As we left the library, Poirot seemed unusually subdued. I followed him into the hall, watching as he paused at the base of the staircase and gazed up toward the upper rooms. You believed him, I said. Yes, Poirot replied. He is a man who thinks with lines and measures. He would never play the wrong note deliberately, even in life. Then what now? Poirot turned toward the corridor leading to Edric's music room. Now, we find the missing note. Something Edric saw, something not in the ledger, but hidden in the silence between two bars. That evening, Poirot requested that Clarissa gather the household staff for a brief interview. In the servants' parlour, beneath low ceilings and a humming wall sconce, Mrs. Thorne and Joseph Kettering the butler stood side by side. Mrs. Thorne clutched her apron tightly. We've told everything we know, sir. I believe you, Poirot replied, but sometimes truth is revealed through routine. Tell me, who cleaned Edric's room after his disappearance? I did, sir, she answered, but not until the day after the constables had finished. And the clothing? Folded and stored, nothing unusual. Except, Poirot said, his voice gently probing, one missing item, a pair of trousers, tweed. Mrs. Thorne blinked. Now that you mention it, yes. I thought he might have been wearing them when he left. Poirot nodded slowly, and no signs of them since. No, sir. He turned to Kettering. You were on duty the night of the recital. Yes, sir. I served wine at the beginning, then retired to the pantry. I wasn't called again. Did you see anyone go outside after Edric? No, sir. But I did hear something. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Ah, at last. Kettering fidgeted. It was some time after midnight. I was finishing the silver when I heard the back latch creak. I peeked from the pantry. I saw someone coming in through the garden door. Just a shape in the dark. Couldn't make out who it was. Poirot leaned forward. And the shape, what about it? Male, female? The butler hesitated. Smaller than Edric, slim. Could have been Miss Carlyle, or even Mr. Lionel. I can't be sure. Poirot didn't press. He simply nodded and stepped back. We are done for now, he said softly. Merci. Later that night, Poirot paced the hallway outside Edric's bedroom. He paused by the window, arms folded, his face unreadable. Hastings, he said quietly, there is a pattern to this. The ledger, the typed notes, the quiet return through the garden door. Someone in this house knew Edric would not be missed until morning. Someone who counted on the household's silence. And the missing trousers? Poirot turned to me, eyes sharp. They are the key. Why remove only one item unless it held something incriminating? A stain, perhaps, or a pocketed clue? I frowned. Then we're looking for a body. No, Poirot said. We are looking for a secret that never reached the surface. One that Edric died or vanished trying to expose. A wind rustled. The curtains. Poirot looked down the corridor toward the music room. Tomorrow, he said softly, we shall listen to Edric's music once more. Every note he played, and more importantly, every note he did not. Chapter 7. The Silence Between Two Notes. The next morning dawned with low-hanging clouds, and a drizzle that blurred the edges of the countryside. Inside the Aubrey estate, however, the air was still and heavy, as though each corridor held its breath. Poirot requested that the music room remain undisturbed, its doors closed until he chose to re-enter. When I found him there, he was seated in the same high-backed chair Edric had once used during recitals, his eyes closed, and a phonograph set on a small table beside him. He looked up as I entered. "Ah, Hastings, come, sit. Today we must listen with more than our ears." He gestured to the chair opposite, where a stack of phonograph records lay beside an envelope marked in Edric Aubrey's distinctive hand. "I found these last night in Edric's cabinet. Recordings of his own work, drafts, sketches, practice runs. But one of them," he said, lifting the top disc, "was labelled only with a date. October 16th, the day before the recital." I frowned. "And what does that suggest?" Poirot carefully placed the record on the turntable. That Edric recorded something, perhaps something meant only for himself. The soft crackle of static filled the room, and then came the low, rich sound of a solo violin, wavering, intimate, played with emotion so tightly bound it seemed to shiver. The melody was unmistakable, the swan. But halfway through the familiar rise of the second passage, Edric's bow faltered. The music ceased. There was a pause. Then Edric's voice, low and controlled, spoke into the recording. "If you are hearing this, then I have failed, or someone has succeeded. I no longer know whom I can trust. There are too many masks in this house, too many polite lies. And now I believe I am being watched." Poirot let the record continue to spin, but there was no further sound. Sat back, stunned. He knew, didn't he? He knew someone was planning something. Poirot nodded. Yes, and he left a trace. Not of his murderer, perhaps, but of his fear, his knowledge. He stood and walked to the music stand. "Hastings, what do you see?" A score sheet. The Swan. Poirot tapped a pencil against the margin. "Look closer." I peered down. The sheet had annotations, dynamic markings, fingerings, boo direction. But in the lower margin was a series of small dots, as if from a fine-pointed pencil or pen. They were not musical. Poirot took a small magnifying lens from his pocket. "Morse code," he murmured, disguised among the notes. "Très ingénieux." He transcribed the markings onto a notebook and slowly decoded them. A few minutes passed before he read aloud, "Hiding truth in music. Ledger reveals part, but look at his study, lower panel. Find the name." Poirot's expression hardened. So Edric left a breadcrumb, not a scream, but a whisper. We made our way immediately to Edmund Aubrey's study. Poirot closed the door behind us, then knelt beside the lower panels of the bookshelf behind the desk. With delicate fingers, he ran a hand along the wood until it halted over a narrow groove. With a faint click, a small section of the panel slid aside. Inside was a thin folder, yellowed at the edges. Poirot removed it carefully and opened it across the desk. Inside were financial statements, bank drafts, and a series of typed pages under a single header. Trust account, VC, authorized by EA. But the content was not merely related to Vera Carlyle. The documents detailed a series of payments and redirections. funds taken from the Aubrey Family Trust and quietly funneled to various individuals. Some names were redacted, others were not. Poirot's eyes scanned quickly. This is not just a record of generosity. This is a trail of guilt. Someone used these accounts to cover something, or to pay someone for silence. He stopped on one name, J. Kettering. I blinked. The butler. Poirot nodded. Received 3 payments over the last year for estate security services. That is an odd euphemism. He turned another page and drew a sharp breath. A photocopy of a legal affidavit was tucked beneath the account sheet, unsigned but clearly a draft. I, Edric Aubrey, being of sound mind and knowledge, assert that my father, Edmund Aubrey, and others within this household have knowingly obscured the disappearance of one Margaret Carlyle. Poirot stared at the page. I leaned forward. Margaret? Wasn't that Vera's mother? Yes, Poirot said slowly. Who supposedly died quietly last spring. Yet here, Edric claims there was more. He closed the folder. Hastings, he said with quiet finality, we must speak with Miss Carlyle again, and not about Edric, about her mother. We found Vera alone in the solarium, seated beneath a wide stained-glass window. The rain tapped steadily against the glass, but she did not seem to notice. Her eyes were fixed on the distant gardens, unfocused. Poirot approached her gently. Mademoiselle, forgive me, but I must ask you directly. What happened to your mother? She turned slowly. She died, she said flatly. Last spring. Poirot held her gaze. That is what you've said. But Edric believed otherwise. He wrote an affidavit, a draft, suggesting her death was not natural, that it was hushed, that someone in this house helped obscure it. Her lips parted, and a flicker of something fear, perhaps, passed across her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Poirot stepped closer. But you do. A pause, then quietly. She didn't die peacefully. She died of an overdose. A mistake, the doctor said. But Edric, he thought it was something else. He thought she'd been encouraged. Encouraged? I echoed. She looked down. She'd become unstable, paranoid. She accused Edmund of things, terrible things, of blackmail, of controlling her. Edric believed her, and when she died, he blamed the household, especially the staff who'd been watching over her, Joseph Kettering among them. And so he planned to reveal it. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. He said the recital would be his goodbye, that afterward everything would come out. I begged him not to. I said it would destroy everything, and he told me maybe it should. Poirot said nothing for a long moment, then very softly, Merci, mademoiselle. He turned and left the solarium, walking briskly now, the puzzle beginning to align. And as we followed him into the corridor, he murmured, The music is nearly complete, Hastings. The notes are aligning, but there is still one movement left to play. Chapter 8. The Portrait That Heard. Too much rain drummed steadily against the windows as Poirot led me down a side passage seldom used by the household. It was narrow and unlit, flanked by forgotten portraits, tarnished sconces, and the faded scent of wax and old cedar. At the end stood a door we had not yet noticed, set discreetly between the panelling, painted to match the walls. Poirot gestured toward it. "This, Hastings, is the service corridor connecting the music room with the west wing." I stared at the hidden door, but no one mentioned it. Precisely. And yet Edric's final exit, the one no one could explain, may have taken this route, quiet, hidden, and leading directly past the servants' quarters. He pushed it open. The hinges let out a low groan, and we stepped into darkness. Poirot flicked on a small electric torch. The corridor was tight, the wallpaper aged and peeling. At the far end, a single oil painting hung crookedly, a portrait of a young Edmund Aubrey with a violin under his arm and a cold glint in his eyes. Poirot stopped in front of it. "You see, Hastings, houses like this often keep secrets not in the locked rooms, but in what lies between them." He reached behind the portrait and pressed lightly on the wall. A soft click echoed, and a small wooden panel slid open behind the frame. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a narrow, flat box. Poirot withdrew it and laid it gently on the corridor bench. With great care, he undid the bindings and opened the lid. Inside was a violin, not Edric's, but an older, weathered instrument. Alongside it, bound with string, were 3 sheets of music, a velvet pouch containing a locket, and a folded letter. Poirot opened the letter, its ink faded but still legible. "To Edric, if you find this, then you have uncovered what I have hidden for too long. Your grandfather's violin, yes, but more than that, his legacy. This instrument was meant to go to you, not to be lost in my pride. I could never admit it, but I feared your talent. It surpassed mine. And when I saw in you the fire I once had, I knew I'd lost the chance to be the great man I pretended to be. I hope you'll forgive me one day." EAI stared at the signature. Edmund wrote this. Poirot gave a slight nod. He never meant Edric to find it, but guilt leaves traces, and Edric found them. He turned over one of the music sheets. Scribbled at the corner was a message, played it, heard everything, not just the notes. Someone in the walls, listening. Poirot froze, then turned toward the corridor wall behind us. "There," he said quietly. "That is where we must go." He followed the corridor until it met another narrow turn, this one leading behind the servants. Stairwell. At its centre was a thin door, nearly lost in the shadows. Poirot opened it, revealing a spiral staircase of stone, worn by decades of unseen feet. We climbed in silence. At the top was a small landing with a latticed window overlooking the garden. From here, the layout of the house shifted. Tucked passageways, servant dormitories, unused closets. Poirot moved swiftly, as if drawn by instinct. Finally, he stopped before a small attic door. Inside was a space no larger than a box room. Dust swirled in the torchlight. An old trunk sat in the corner, and beside it, a single tweed trouser leg, torn at the knee. Poirot knelt. The missing trousers! And look! Inside the pocket was a slip of paper, stained but intact. He knows about Margaret. If I disappear, look here, do not trust Lionel. I stared at Poirot. Lionel! But he said he was in the library the whole night. Poirot stood slowly. Yes, but Joseph Kettering only saw a slim figure, and Lionel had access to the garden door, to the library, and crucially, To this attic. He moved to the trunk and lifted the lid. Inside was a bundle of discarded clothes, old programs from Aubrey performances, and a black leather-bound notebook. Poirot flipped through it. The handwriting was Lionel's. He always had the love. Migou had nothing but walls and whispers. Now he threatens it all. Let him vanish like the rest. Let the music stop. Let the silence sing louder than him. Poirot closed the notebook with quiet finality. "We must speak to Lionel," he said, "but not with accusations, not yet." Lionel was in the conservatory when we returned. He sat at the piano, fingers lazily drifting over the keys, playing an eerie, repetitive fragment. He looked up as we entered. "Ah, the maestro returns. Tell me, have you solved it? Is Edric playing hide-and-seek with the ivy?" Poirot approached calmly. "You play beautifully, Monsieur Lionel, but you do not play with joy." Lionel's fingers froze. "Joy is a luxury," he said quietly. "Some of us are raised in echo chambers, told to smile while others shine." Poirot nodded. "And when Edric shone too brightly, you found a way to dim him." There was silence. Then Lionel laughed, not loudly, but hollowly. "You think I killed him?" Poirot tilted his head. "I think you envied him. I think you found him in the corridor that night, that you confronted him about what he'd found. The ledger, the secret funds, Margaret Carlyle's truth." "He was going to ruin everything," Lionel snapped. "This family, this house, our name. All for what? A dead woman and a ghost of a scandal?" Poirot's voice remained soft. "And so you made him vanish." "I didn't kill him," Lionel said sharply. "I scared him. I threatened to expose him, said I'd tell Vera he forged part of the ledger. He ran. I thought he'd come back. He didn't." Poirot's gaze did not shift. "Then where is he?" Lionel hesitated. "I don't know." Poirot was silent for a moment. Then calmly, "I think you do." Lionel looked away, and the silence that followed was heavier than any music we'd heard that week. Chapter 9. The Final Rehearsal. The silence that fell in the conservatory was almost sacred, thick with unspoken confessions, with the echo of Lionel's last brittle words still hanging in the air. Poirot did not speak at once. He simply watched Lionel Aubrey with the stillness of a man accustomed to letting others fill the void. Lionel's hands rested on the keys. They did not move. Poirot stepped closer. "Monsieur Lionel, I do not believe you are a murderer by design. But circumstances, resentment and fear, they make murderers of men who never imagined the possibility." Lionel's eyes lifted. There was no defiance now, only fatigue. "I didn't kill him," he said again, but softer this time. "I scared him. I wanted to frighten him." "Why?" Poirot asked. "Because of the inheritance. Because he exposed the secret about Margaret Carlyle." Lionel hesitated. "No, it was more than that. He said he was going to change the will, that he'd convinced father to remove me entirely. Said I was a leech, a ghost in the walls." Poirot gave a small nod, as if something that had long puzzled him now slipped into place. "And so that night, after the recital, you followed him?" "Yes," Lionel whispered. "He left the music room early. Everyone thought he was going for air, but I saw him slip through the corridor toward the back staircase. I waited, then went after him. I thought he was heading to Father's study. And instead, I found him in the attic stairwell, pacing, muttering. He'd found Grandfather's violin. He said he was going to announce everything at breakfast. I panicked. I shouted at him. We argued. Poirot's voice dropped. And then Lionel looked away. He pushed past me. I grabbed his coat. He stumbled, fell backward into the wall. His head struck the edge of the stair. Hastings drew in a sharp breath. You killed him! No, Lionel cried. He wasn't dead. He was bleeding, yes, but conscious, groggy. I dragged him to the attic. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted time to think. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And what did you do with him? I left him there. I locked the stairwell door and told myself I'd go back after everyone had gone to bed. But when I returned, he was gone. Gone, I swear it. The door was still locked from the outside, but he was no longer inside. Poirot was silent for a long moment. Then he said softly, You may not have killed him, monsieur, but you disappeared him, and someone else may have done the rest. Clarissa was in the drawing-room when Poirot summoned her. She sat beside the piano, hands folded tightly in her lap, her posture stiff but composed. I've spoken to Lionel, Poirot said. I heard, she replied, her voice taut. The house listens to everything. Poirot gave her a long, unreadable look. You have protected many people in this house, mademoiselle. Too many, at the cost of truth. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. You knew Edric had found something dangerous, Poirot continued. Something that would shatter the Aubrey name. You knew Lionel had threatened him, and yet you did not intervene. Clarissa's gaze fell to the carpet. What could I do? Edric was driven. He would have torn everything down. Lionel, for all his bitterness, was still family. And father, he was already broken by Margaret's death. I didn't want to see him shamed. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Protecting the family is noble, but shielding a lie is not. Edric left a trail, not because he sought vengeance, but because he wanted someone to understand. He loved this house, even as it suffocated him. Clarissa swallowed. So what happens now? We find Edric, Poirot said, dead or alive. But more importantly, we find the truth he left behind. That evening, Poirot asked the family and household staff to gather once more in the drawing-room, every chair occupied, every gaze fixed on the small Belgian figure who stood before the cold fireplace. He held nothing in his hands, no ledger, no violin, only the weight of what had been unearthed. Monsieur Edmond, he began, your son was not a madman. He was a musician, and like all great musicians, he listened to more than sound. He listened to silences, and in those silences he found your secrets. Edmond stiffened but did not respond. Poirot turned. Madame Thorne, you said you heard music from a locked room, but I believe what you truly heard was a man trying to signal from somewhere he was trapped. Not the music room, but a room beneath it. The assembled company stirred. Poirot gestured toward the floor. There is a servant's access hatch beneath the drawing-room, long disused but not sealed. A perfect place to hide someone, or something. He looked directly at Kettering. And you, monsieur, were paid for estate security. But your real duty was silence. You saw what Lionel did that night. You helped move Edric. Perhaps you thought it temporary. But when he vanished, you kept your mouth shut. Why? Kettering's mouth twitched. It wasn't my place. Poirot's voice rang sharper. It was exactly your place. Clarissa stood suddenly. Is he? Do you think he's still alive? Poirot's expression was unreadable. I think it is time we find out. The access hatch was beneath the large rug in the drawing-room, just behind Mouche the grand piano. With Edmund's reluctant consent, 2 of the footmen pulled the rug aside, revealing a square of warped wood. Kettering produced an old brass key from his waistcoat, an act that earned him more than one frozen glare, and fitted it into the lock. The hatch groaned open. Stale air rose from below. Poirot peered into the darkness. Hastings, bring a lamp. We descended slowly, the stairs narrow and rotting. The space below was cramped, filled with old crates, rusted instruments and forgotten furniture. And then, in the far corner, motion. A hand, pale and trembling. Poirot surged forward, and we found him, Edric Aubrey, alive. Barely. His clothes were torn, his skin hollow and pale, but his eyes, those clear, furious eyes, were unmistakable. He clutched something in his hand, a folded piece of music paper. Poirot knelt beside him. Mon ami, he said softly, you kept playing the music, even in silence. Edric's voice, rasping, barely audible, was a single word. Lionel. Chapter 10. The Note That Would Not Die. The silence in the hidden cellar was suffocating, less from the stale air than from the collective breath held above, waiting for Poirot to speak. I crouched beside Edric Aubrey, who now lay reclined against a faded trunk, his chest rising shallowly beneath his torn shirt. His cheeks were sunken, his lips dry, but there was clarity in his eyes, a will that had refused to yield. Poirot held his wrist, checking the pulse with delicate precision. Weak, he murmured, but steady. He has endured more than most men could. Clarissa knelt beside him moments later, her hands trembling as she reached for her brother's. Edric! Edric, can you hear me? He blinked once. Then, with visible effort, he lifted the crumpled sheet from his lap and pressed it into Poirot's hand. Poirot unfolded it gently. It was not a composition, but a page torn from the back of an earlier score, scrawled in pencil. With a shaky but deliberate hand, they moved me in the night. I awoke here. The hatch, no light. Lionel's voice said I'd thank him later, said the music would be safe. He took my notes, my violin. Poirot rose to his feet and turned toward the stairwell. We must get him help, at once. Within the hour, Edric was moved to the upstairs guest room, where a doctor, fetched hastily from the village, administered fluids, examined his injuries, and confirmed that while malnourished and dehydrated, he would recover. But as the physical crisis abated, the psychological storm gathered. Lionel was nowhere to be found. The house was searched top to bottom, garrets, gardens, cellars, but no sign of him emerged. His room remained untouched. His books sat neatly stacked on the nightstand, but the window was ajar, and on the ledge a scuff mark suggested a hasty exit. Poirot, meanwhile, said little. He sat for an hour at Edric's bedside, listening as the young man, still hoarse, recalled fragments of his ordeal. "I confronted him," Edric whispered. "He told me it was better this way, that I was too loud for a house built on secrets." Poirot leaned forward. "And the ledger? Gone. He burned what he took, but I'd already hidden copies. I hid them in the violin case." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The empty case, always present, always untouched. We returned to the music room. Poirot moved swiftly now, all his movements deliberate. He unclasped the old violin case atop the piano and lifted the velvet lining. Beneath it lay a narrow envelope, brittle with time. Inside were 3 folded sheets, copies of ledger pages, the very ones that implicated not only Edmund's illicit payments, but also several forged signatures. Among them, Lionel's. Poirot spread the pages on the grand piano, each line a note in the symphony of betrayal. Clarissa entered quietly behind us. "Is it all here?" "Yes," Poirot replied. "Enough to prove Lionel was siphoning money from the family accounts long before Vera's loans, long before Edric began asking questions." She sat heavily on the piano bench. "I always suspected, but I never imagined. None of us imagine what family is capable of," Poirot said gently, "until they rewrite the ending of our lives." The next day brought police to the estate. Poirot, ever meticulous, had assembled his timeline, his documentation and his evidence into a presentation as elegant as a chamber piece. He delivered it without theatrics, letting the weight of the facts speak for themselves. Inspector Tremaine, an austere man from the county constabulary, absorbed the case with furrowed brows. "So Lionel Aubrey confined his cousin," he muttered, "kept him hidden below the house while pretending nothing had occurred. No murder then, but abduction, attempted obstruction, fraud." "Indeed," Poirot said, "and a final act of desperation, perhaps, when Edric refused to remain silent." "But where is Lionel now?" Poirot's brow creased. "Gone, but not far. A man who has lived in shadows does not travel in daylight. He is still in Sussex, possibly even watching." The inspector's jaw tightened. "We'll alert every station in the county. His image will be circulated by nightfall." Poirot gave a slight bow. "Merci." That evening, as quiet returned to the house, Poirot and I sat by the fire in the drawing-room, the heat flickering against the walls that had heard so many falsehoods. "You knew early, didn't you?" I asked. "That it was Lionel. I suspected," Poirot replied. "But one does not act on suspicion. One listens, observes, waits." He sipped his tisane. "Lionel was too still, too measured. He left no emotional imprint after Edric's disappearance. That is unnatural. A man may lie with words, Hastings, but rarely with silence." I looked toward the grand piano, the now empty case, the restored family portrait. What of the others? "Clarissa will heal," Poirot said. "So will Vera. And Edmund, he will face his own shame in private. But this house, it may never be whole again. Some harmonies cannot be rewritten." Outside, the rain had ceased. A low wind stirred the hedges, and somewhere in the distance a bird began to sing. Poirot folded his hands. "In the end, mon ami," he said, "it was not Edric's music that vanished. It was the false tune the others tried to play over it." looked toward the fire, eyes dark with thought. "But truth," he murmured, "has perfect pitch." Chapter 11. The fugitive in the Fogget was the following morning when news came from the village constable. A sighting, just past dawn. A man matching Lionel Aubrey's description had been seen walking through the low woods beyond the old Whitcomb Mill. A scarf pulled high, his coat soaked through. He had asked the groundskeeper for directions toward the coastal road and vanished soon after into the fog-bound lanes that stretched toward Seaford. Poirot was already dressed when the constable's boy delivered the message. He folded the note and rose without a word. I followed him out into the crisp morning, where the fog hung low and heavy, muffling the world as though the air itself conspired to hide Lionel. We arrived at the mill shortly after 8. The path was soft with dew and marked by prints, heavy ones leading into the thickets, angled slightly left. Poirot studied them for several moments before speaking. "He is not heading for the train, nor for the coast directly," he murmured. "He is circling, waiting, perhaps for words, perhaps to see if the house remains unaware." I glanced around, but surely he knows by now the police are involved. Poirot's gaze narrowed, which means he is no longer running from justice. He is running from a choice. We followed the path further into the woods. Here the trees closed in, their branches low and dripping. The world was still, save for the occasional rustle of wind through wet leaves. Then a movement, a flash of dark cloth slipping between two trees. Poirot raised a hand. We moved quietly, each step deliberate, breath shallow. Then we found him. Lionel stood at the edge of a low ravine, facing away, one foot balanced on the narrow outcrop of earth that sloped downward into brambles. He held his coat tight, shoulders hunched, as though shrinking beneath the weight of the air itself. He did not turn when Poirot approached. "I thought it might be you," he said. Poirot stopped 5 paces behind him. "And yet you remained. Why?" Lionel gave a faint laugh. "Because the music never ends. It only waits for the next movement." Poirot's voice was quiet. "You do not have to leap, monsieur. There is still time for a coda." Lionel turned. Then his face was gaunt, the night's escape etched in every hollow of his expression. His eyes, once gleaming with sarcasm, were now shadowed with defeat. "I never meant to kill him," he said. "I wanted him to disappear for a while, just long enough to make him doubt himself, make them doubt him, so I could stay." Poirot nodded. "But he did not disappear. He endured, and he remembered." Lionel's voice cracked. "I thought he'd hate me, but he still trusted me enough to leave that note." "He wanted you to be found," Poirot said gently. "Not punished, found. That is the difference between justice and revenge." A long silence passed between them. Then Lionel stepped down from the ledge. "I'll go with you," he said. By midday, Lionel Aubrey was in custody at the Sussex County Jail, charged with unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy, and fraud. There was talk of further charges, depending on the outcome of Edric's full testimony. Poirot, however, showed no sense of triumph. He returned to the Aubrey estate, as one might return to a stage after the applause had died, quietly, with reverence. Edric now recovering with a flush returning to his cheeks, received us in the library, the same place he had once practised in solitude. He smiled faintly as we entered. "Did you find him?" Poirot inclined his head. He did not run as far as he thought he might. Edric looked away. "I never hated him, you know. I pitied him. He was always chasing a version of himself he could never be." "Many do," Poirot said, "but few leave as much ruin behind." Edric nodded. "Will you stay for the inquest?" "No," Poirot replied. "The law will take its course, but my work here is done." Clarissa entered then, carrying a small case. Edric's violin, cleaned, restored, strings newly tightened. "He insisted it be waiting when you were well." "Enough," she said softly, placing it in his lap. Edric held the instrument with care, his fingers brushing the strings as though greeting an old friend. Poirot stepped back, his gaze softening. "Play, monsieur. Let the house hear your voice again." Edric lifted the violin beneath his chin, closed his eyes, and began to play. The opening notes of the Swan rose softly through the air, not mournful this time, but resolute. A tone of survival, of return. Clarissa watched from the window, tears brimming but unshed. I turned to Poirot. "Will you tell the papers? What truly happened?" He shook his head. "No. Let the music speak for itself. The world need not know every dissonance to hear a song made whole." Outside, the fog began to lift, and for the first time in days, sunlight touched the high windows of the estate, catching on the polished brass of the latch that once locked a prodigal son away. But no longer. Poirot's eyes lingered on the light as it moved across the floorboards. "Come, Hastings," he said at last. "The overture has ended, and so must we take our bow." Chapter 12. The final note, ched as though the weight of every secret had finally begun to crush him. When he turned to face us, his eyes were ringed with sleepless shadow, and his expression was more haunted than cornered. He did not run. "Don't! Come closer," Lionel said, his voice carrying through the fog like a frayed violin string. "I won't be dragged back like a criminal. Not after everything." Poirot stepped forward slowly, deliberately, hands folded before him. "Non, monsieur. I do not come as a jailer. I come as a man who has seen too many finales end in silence. And you, Lionel, are not silent. Not truly." Lionel gave a bitter laugh. "You don't know what it's like, to live in that house and always be the echo, never the melody. Edric was adored, even in his madness. I was tolerated." "You were more than tolerated," Poirot replied calmly. "You were protected. Clarissa lied for you. Edmund blinded himself to your bitterness. But it is not too late to give the story an honest coda." "I didn't mean for it to happen," Lionel said hoarsely. "I only wanted him to stop, just for once, to listen instead of perform." Poirot took another step. "Then listen now. You must come with us. There is still time to stand on the right side of this story." For a moment, the only sound was the wind brushing against the leaves. Then Lionel's shoulders slumped. "If I go back, I'll be nothing again." "You'll be the man who chose the truth," Poirot said. "That is something." After a long pause, Lionel stepped back from the ravine's edge. He did not speak again, but he let Poirot and me walk beside him, as we retraced the muddy path toward the waiting constable. The fog thinned as we emerged from the woods, and the spire of the village chapel came into view, its bell tolling the hour like the first stroke of a long-overdue reckoning. Lionel was taken into custody without struggle. He offered no final words, no protest, only a single glance back toward the direction of the estate, half longing, half farewell. Back at the Aubrey estate, Edric sat upright in bed for the first time in days, pale but lucid. Clarissa held his hand. Vera sat nearby, silent but present. Poirot entered the room like a man finishing a difficult symphony. "It is done," he said softly. Edric's voice cracked. "He'll be imprisoned." Poirot nodded. "For some time, yes. But he will live, and so will you." Edric looked away, to the window where the first clear sun in days spilled across the sill. "Then I suppose it's time for me to start composing again." Poirot smiled gently. "Oui, mon ami, and this time the silence will be yours to fill." Epilogue. The last note. Played weeks later, I received a parcel at my flat in London. Inside was a slim envelope with Edric's handwriting and a small record sealed in a paper sleeve. I set it on the phonograph and let the needle drop. It began with the soft hush of string on string, a single violin, fragile at first, like morning, light through fog. Then it grew, blooming into a melody that seemed to contain all that had happened: betrayal, grief, survival, and the tender ache of beginnings. Poirot, seated beside the fireplace, closed his eyes as it played. "The Swan," I said, recognizing the motif, but changed. He nodded. He wrote a new arrangement, one that remembers what was lost and what remains. I listened until the last note faded. Poirot opened his eyes. "In the end, Hastings," he said, "truth is like music. You may try to drown it, but eventually it finds its way back into the air." And in that quiet room, with the needle returning to rest, I believed him.